So it's 83 pages long, the letter, but it's you can read it in a day. I think you can, certainly within a couple days. You use Creative Commons attribution, which I thought was Creative Commons licensing, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
What went into that decision?
It's not my information, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, the Tanners. They're the real hipsters. I mean,
The Tanners?
Yeah, they knew a lot of this stuff in the 60s, and they're just now being vindicated. I heard about the Tanners, the anti-Mormons, and, the God makers and all that stuff. But, I mean, how could you not watch that interview with Sandra Tanner? She's just this nice grandma that knows a lot of stuff about Mormon history. I'm not a Christian. I don't really relate to the whole Christian stuff. But they're just what they would, the stuff that they figured out and came out with, they were involved in a lot of stuff, the Mark Hoffman stuff, the Book of Abraham. So it's really interesting. But I stand on the shoulders of giants. What I did is I took their research and their insights and their works, and I put it in a way that worked best for me, that explained my train of thought in terms of why I no longer believe in the church.
It's almost like a condensed version of Mormonism, Shadow and Reality, in the sense, if you look at the Tanner's book, Mormonism, Shadow and Reality, it's like several inches thick. And this is a lot thinner.
Yeah.
So you could even see it as a distillation without the bold and capitalized letters and underlined letters that Gerald was famous for.
But yeah, this relates to my deafness. Writing is really my language. It's just the place where I don't mispronounce stuff, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just my language. It's where I'm comfortable. So I've developed this way of being able to communicate through writing that I guess a lot of people relate to. But I just want to get straight to the point, boom, 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 boom. Because anybody can write a 500-page book or whatever. I wanted something that, like, the CES director would read. Yeah. So at the time, this was directed to the CES director in my family.
So read the quote you have from J. Reuben Clark at the beginning.
If we have the truth, no harm can come from investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed.
If we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. I just thought that bore repetition. So, all right. So this is going to be hard because we're going to try and cover a lot of ground in a relatively short amount of time. But let's start with the Book of Mormon. If you had to summarize maybe your top 3 concerns with the Book of Mormon, if that's even possible, or what are some of the main concerns in the Book of Mormon?
The presence of 1769 King James Version errors in the Book of Mormon. This is 1769 version. This is errors specific to that edition. What is it doing in the Book of Mormon? Supposedly ancient texts, with these ancient prophets and the Americas that were engraving on gold plates. What are the errors doing in there?
So we've got a version of the King James Bible that we know that Joseph had in his possession.
That FAIR would say, well, he didn't, but if I shoot you with 9mm bullets and you're on the ground and there's 9mm bullets around, it doesn't matter whether a witness, you don't need witnesses or a video recording of the murder. Just the fact that there's 9mm bullets, shell casings on the floor is its own damning evidence. So, put another way, what are 19th century 9mm shell casings or bullets doing in a work from the Book of Mormon time before 421 AD?
Yeah, so there are errors in that version of the Bible, the 1769 King James Version of the Bible. how in the world do we go from the prophets writing, the Nephite prophets writing what they wrote or writing down Christ's words, then it gets, it gets spoken by Jesus, then it gets written in the plates, then it gets saved, it gets abridged by Mormon or Moroni, whoever abridged it, then it gets put in a hill, then later it gets delivered to Joseph, then he has to translate through the power and gift of God these plates, and then all of a sudden we've got direct quotes coming from this version of the Bible.
Yeah, like errors.
That are errors.
It's not just quotes.
Unique to that edition.
Yeah, in FAIR, they changed their answer, but basically they said, well, it's possible God gave them the errors.
Maybe God inspired Joseph to include the errors.
Yeah.
To test our faith. Maybe.
Well, I mean, if God's going to test our faith, like I don't want to worship that kind of God that's playing games with, you know what I mean? But that's how damning the evidence is. He put errors in it, and FAIR admitted that, maybe it's possible that God gave the errors. Okay. So that's a big one right there. The other big one for me is the Sermon on the Mount. There's the Sermon on the Mount in the Book of Mormon, and there's the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible, and they're identical. Well, later Joseph Smith basically said, well, I got to go fix this. So he did a Joseph Smith translation on the Sermon on the Mount, and it's different. So he basically corrected the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible, but unwittingly, the Book of Mormon contains that incorrect Sermon on the Mount passage that he corrected. So why is the Book of Mormon containing that incorrect Sermon on the Mount passage when it should have contained the correct Joseph Smith translation to begin with?
So if Joseph produced the true version of the Bible through his translation, that should have just appeared
exactly in
the Book of Mormon,
yeah.
But it doesn't. Yeah.
And then the other one is the Italics. So basically, this is 17th century King James translators. They put their own words into the text to make the English more readable. And these are like for example, there's 7 words exactly in consecutive order, you know what I mean, that these translators put in 1611, 1612.
Sort of translating the Hebrew and then adding their own...
Well, translating, from what I understand, Latin.
Okay.
Or
Greek or...
Yeah, somewhere, not sure exactly. But basically taking, like, in translating, they're putting their own words into it.
And they italicize those words.
Yeah.
So that we know they were...
That's how we know that they were words that the translators put in. So
why are the words of translators of the New Testament also showing up?
Well, why are the words of 17th century, basically 1611, 1612, 1613 dudes in England? Why are their words appearing into this ancient Book of Mormon that was written in the Americas thousands of years ago?
Yeah.
And the exact words, and I mean,
Going back to the translation, Joseph Smith translation, you would think he would have known if he had used the Bible to just create the Book of Mormon. You would think that he would have remembered that he did that, and remembered that if he were to do a retranslation of the New Testament, that would show a discrepancy, right?
Every genius makes their mistakes once in a while. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how perfect. Like, there's always going to be a slip up somewhere. You know what I mean? I don't know. It goes back to, I show you with 9mm bullets. We can talk about, well, why didn't Joseph know this? Or, why did he let this happen? It doesn't matter. We have the 9mm shell casings in ancient work.
Yeah. Okay. You talk about DNA in here. I think we've covered that some on Mormon Stories. I think we had Simon Southerton on at one point. Anachronisms we covered with Michael Coe. I refer our listeners to that very good interview, Archaeology. Anything else about the Book of Mormon that sticks out? You've got a really good map here, and we can maybe splice in this image of Book of Mormon geography. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so the Book of Mormon geography is based on a guy by the name of Vernon Hawley, and he in his work Book of Mormon, what was it? Book of Mormon authorship at Kinderhook. This is kind of controversial. So it's basically what he did is he based the geography based on Joseph Smith's backyard in upstate New York, New England, parts of Canada. And so there's similarities. He obviously made some mistakes, and FAIR pointed those mistakes out, and I corrected them in the CES letter. And so if you go to Debunking FAIR's Debunking, which is, on my website, you can see some of the different individual cities that me and FAIR went over. FAIR says, well, this city is incorrect, and I go, well, yeah, okay, that's incorrect. So it's to me, it's not a slam dunk. It's not proof that Joseph Smith, it's not the strongest point in my paper. But I just put it there just to kind of, it's interesting. It's got some names in there that's very similar to, or if not the same as, many of the cities in Joseph Smith's time.
Some of the examples would be...
So there's a few of them, like, there's like Lehi, and then there's Ramah, which is basically the Jaredite Hill Gomorrah. It's close by. FAIR says, well, it's not exactly in Palmyra where the Hill Gomorrah is, but a lot of what apologists and ex-Mormons that say, well, Joseph Smith messed up, don't realize is that the maps don't have to match up perfectly. They just have to match up closely. You know what I mean? Like, it's not real. If somebody's making it up, like the Lord of the Rings, it doesn't matter if a city is, it doesn't make sense that the city's here. It's made up. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the fact that the presence of the name is, And
you're saying, the letter says that there are a lot of names that occur in the Book of Mormon that clearly Joseph
it's possible that Joseph could have used them as reference. Again, I'm not saying that Joseph did it and it's proof and it's slam dunk, case closed. I'm just bringing it up as, it's an interesting note to look at.
And you also talk about Moroni as the capital city in some islands.
In the Comoros.
Comoros.
Yeah, so this is pretty interesting. In the southeast part of Africa, there's an island called Comoros. Its Arabic name is Comora, and that's what it's known, in the earlier days. They had a port, Moroni, so it was famous in Captain Kidd stories because Captain Kidd visited the island on a ship, and there's a famous story where, a lot of his crew members died on the island, and something happened there to where he was later convicted of and hanged, basically for a crime that happened near the island. So it's a big part of the whole Captain Kidd folklore.
Who was it? Who did what? Whose occupation was what?
Well, he was a pirate. He was a treasure hunter, basically.
A treasure hunter. And who else was a treasure hunter?
It was Joseph Smith. And it wasn't just Joseph Smith. It was his dad. It was his brother. They had a family business. And it wasn't just them. You read the newspaper. There's like a newspaper article or a clip of a newspaper that talked about in those days, it was pervasive. It was widespread. In New England, they were really into treasure hunting. They were really into these stories about Captain Kidd, buried treasure in the earth. So Joseph Smith and his family, they had a family business where they would go around to the neighbors, and Joseph Smith would look in his rock in his hat, and gold is over there, silver's over there. Thank you for your money. Have a great day. So, we'll get into the Book of Mormon translation and how that relates to that. But in order to really understand Mormonism, you have to understand the setting, the culture of that time. They were really into folklore. They were really into superstition. So Joseph Smith's neighbor, would come up to you. If he came up to you and you said, "I received the vision of the Lord," your natural response would be to say, "Well, what did the Lord say?" It wouldn't be, "Okay, just stay right here. I'll be right back," and then you go call the mental hospital, come pick up the guy. it was a totally different culture and way of seeing life. And you have to understand the treasure digging and Captain Kidd and all that stuff in order to really understand the witnesses and the restoration of the church, because it really plays into how the witnesses saw like what their worldview was.
And you think that there's a good likelihood that Joseph would have heard these Captain Kidd stories and known about Moroni and Gomorrah? Yeah,
there were nickel and dimes novels in the day. Joseph Smith was in the area where there was a lot of traffic, a lot of coming and going. A lot of people have written articles about the connection, with Captain Kidd stories and Joseph Smith. A lot of new articles are going to be coming out.
Right.
So 2014, 2015 are going to be known as the years of Captain Kidd, because we're just now starting to really understand Captain Kidd and the connection with not just Joseph Smith, but his peers.
So what about I think it's called the loose translation kind of argument that of course Joseph's translating Reformed Egyptian. He can't like use names. He probably doesn't even know how they're pronounced if he's reading Reformed Egyptian. So of course he's just going to pull names, familiar names, whether it's steel or horse or Moroni. He's not going to be able to speak in Reformed Egyptian, so he's going to use words around them.
Well, that's not according to the historical record. When you read David Whitmer's account of how the Rock and the Hat translation, like Joseph Smith would look at the rock and the word would appear on the stone, a peepstone. So it wouldn't disappear and a new word would come up until he got it right, until he pronounced it right. So that's a really tight translation.
So God's giving him the English words through the stone.
Yeah. He's giving him the English words in the stone, but at the same time, he's also giving him weird words like kulum and
kumamum.
Yeah, just weird words that don't mean anything. And, you got this weird situation where there's no horses in the Americas, so you have guys like, Peterson saying, well, maybe they were tapirs.
Tapers, yeah.
Tapers, I'm sorry.
No, it's...
Yeah, so they were tapers, and so you got this, you know what I mean? Like, well, it's not really horse, it's a taper. It just creates this really weird, contorted, it just doesn't make sense,
Also, there's all the currencies
that
have these weird names, too.
Yeah.
So it's not like weird names weren't appearing on the stone, right?
Yeah.
So so why would God give Joseph Moroni or Gomorrah or whatever?
Yeah. And then when you go back to the 1769 King James Version errors in it, it just creates all kinds of problems.
Okay. So there are three other potential sources that you mentioned that are kind of mind-boggling. One is View of the Hebrews, which I think our listeners are going to know about. But then the other is the Late War, and then the other is the first book of Napoleon.
Yeah.
Now, we've also heard people talk about the Spalding manuscript. I don't see much talk of that in your letter, but talk about each of these sources, and then help us make sense for how you're seeing the Book of Mormon come together. Because I've been on a personal quest lately to try and figure out where the book comes from.
Yeah. I credit a lot of the recent work that's going into this to the Johnson brothers. So Chris and Dwayne, they're doing a lot of work. What's happening now is very fascinating because as computers are getting better and better, we're able to process or mine through big data. So what's happening is Google, they're putting more and more books online, and they're making it digital. So we're seeing more and more of these books online, and we're able to go through these books, looking for patterns in certain words. So what's happening is very fascinating in the sense, for example, the late war. This is a fairly new development. I mean, one person wrote about the late war in 2008, But the Johnson brothers, from what I understand, they didn't realize or didn't come across this work until after they released their research. But basically, they went through a lot of books looking for specific Book of Mormon wording that was unique to the Book of Mormon, and basically doing, statistics to see, which works were closest to the wording and pattern and so forth. So Late War was one of them that showed up, and the First Napoleon was another. When you read the Late War, it's just really fascinating. I mean,
Do you mind if I read a little bit of it?
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so you've got this here. So this is a book that was published in 1819.
Yep.
So that would have been a year before Joseph allegedly had his first vision, 11 years before the Book of Mormon would have been produced. And this is how it starts. So this is chapter 1 of the Late War. Now it came to pass in the 1812th year of the Christian era, and in the 36th year after the people of the provinces of Columbia had declared themselves a free and independent nation, that in the 6th month of the same year, on the first day of the month, the chief governor, whom the people had chosen to rule over the land of Columbia, even James, whose surname was Madison, delivered a written paper to the great Sanhedrin of the people who were assembled together. And the name of the city where the people were gathered together was called after the name of the chief captain of the land of Columbia, whose fame extendeth to the uttermost parts of the earth, albeit he had slept with his fathers. So, what does that have to do with the Book of Mormon for you?
Well, it didn't just stop there. I mean, just listening to that, it sounds a lot like the Book of Mormon. But when you start to look at the parallels and the themes that the book also has, I mean, 3 Indian prophets, a rod of iron, war between the wicked and the righteous, maintaining the standard of liberty with righteousness, false Indian prophets.
Brass plates.
Yeah. On the CES letter, there's a link to a webpage. I strongly recommend you click on that link. That's the Dwayne Johnson's webpage. It's an excellent one page that just goes over the late war in relation to the Book of Mormon and seeing the different parallels. It's just really fascinating. You look at that and it really makes you, think about things.
And the fact that it has chiasmus in the text is significant. Why is that significant?
Because, that was a big defense that the apologists used for decades. The Book of Mormon has them as well. They're ancient origin. But
because only Hebrews or whoever would have used chiasmus.
Exactly.
And so it's evidence of an ancient text.
Right. But here we have a contemporary 19th century book in 1819 that's using it. So this really blows out that defense out of the water. So
okay, and what about the first book of Napoleon?
It's very similar too. I mean, when you read and
this is an 1809 book,
right?
So this is even earlier.
Yeah, I mean, and behold, it came to pass in these latter days that an evil spirit came on the face of the earth and greatly troubled the sons of men, and this spirit seized upon and spread amongst the people who dwelt in the land of Gaul. Now in this people the fear of the Lord had not been for many generations, and they had become a corrupt and perverse people. And their chief priest and the nobles of the land and the learned men thereof had become wicked in the imagines of their hearts and in the practices of their life. So,
that sounds very much like the Book of Mormon to me.
And so
or the Bible.
Yeah. Well,
but more like the Book of Mormon.
More like the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And this is something that only those that have really read the Book of Mormon, understand. I mean, there's that language that you become familiar with, you know what I mean? The themes. And so I've read the Book of Mormon, many times. And when I first read this, it floored me. I had to check and see, is this really, it just really floored me, the similarity. So. And
your letter goes on to explain in a lot of details the parallel. But the other thing I'll say just really briefly is I think my listeners will have heard about the View of the Hebrews, which is a book that Oliver Cowdery's minister, Ethan Smith, published. Around what year was View of the Hebrews published?
I think
1825.
Yeah.
So 5 years before the Book of Mormon comes out. And it also has parallels where it's talking about, it's trying to explain the origin of the Native Americans. And it mentions that they came over from Jerusalem in a boat and came to America, and that some were wicked and some were righteous. And there was the wicked group beats the righteous group.
Yeah, like the civilized. Yeah, I mean, it's just got like, Hebrew is the origin of the Indian language. They came from Jerusalem, and the scattering, and, the lost Indian records. It talks about yellow leaves, and, but to take a step back, this isn't just something that some ex-Mormon or anti-Mormon looked into. This Elder B.H. Roberts, he was a general authority. He was a very respected scholar in the church back in the early 20th century. And this was private research that he was doing with the end goal of presenting his research to the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency. And it was private. It wasn't meant to be put out for the church or the world. But it ended up being published in 1985 into a book called Studies of the Book of Mormon. So it's really fascinating. I mean, this was a believing general authority that was struggling with, all these parallels. And I mean, and this wasn't just some author that wrote the view of the Hebrews. Ethan Smith was Oliver Cowdery's pastor in Pulteney. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly, Pulteney, Vermont. So it's very fascinating, the connections. And as you know, after Martin Harris lost the 116 pages, Oliver Cowdery took over as the scribe for the Book of Mormon. And he was more than likely aware of the view of the Hebrews and its connection because his own pastor was all over it. So.
Okay, so let's go back to the macro view for a second. So we've got the late war, we've got the Napoleon, we've got view of the Hebrews. What does this have to do with the Book of Mormon? Do you have a theory of how the Book of Mormon was produced?
I don't have an original theory, but I share the Johnsons' point of view that everything is a remix. So it's not like Joseph Smith used one source, and that tends to be the point of view of the people, the Spalding manuscript and all that, But I look at it as everything's a remix. So, for example, we know that Joseph Smith used 1769 King James Version errors in the Book of Mormon. They're there. We also know...
So we know one source for sure.
Yeah. But we also know that it's not just the Book of Mormon. When you go into the Book of Abraham and you see how Joseph Smith copied hieroglyphic characters from different papyri to fill in missing parts of, facsimile 2, for example, he copied totally random hieroglyphics and he turned them around and there's I have graphics on in the Debunking FAIR's Debunking, but it shows how he grabbed the hieroglyphics and he turned them around and switched them around to fill in the damaged parts of facsimile 2. So you see that modus operandi. You see that pattern, how he's grabbing stuff from different sources. In the Book of Abraham, there's a lot of similarities between, the name of the book, that's A Future State, Philosophy of a Future State. So to me, he didn't just use one source. I mean, another example is the Lehi's dream. That was his father's 1811 dream. That's another thing that he borrowed for the Book of Mormon.
And that's in your letter.
Yeah.
And it is pretty, there's a tree and there's an iron rod, right? And a great and spacious building.
Yeah.
It's
just when you read Lehi's dream and compare it to Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, it's very similar. So just, for example, looking at the Book of Mormon, the errors in Lehi's dream and Joseph Smith's father, you see that it's not just one source, it's different sources. And everything is a remix, I mean, people think that Star Wars is original. It's not. I mean, there's a lot of borrowing from different sources and previous shows and, to create some. So you look at life and a lot of the creative work, people are borrowing from different sources. So I share the view of the Johnson brothers on this subject.
That he drew from many sources.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you think he had any collaborators in authoring it?
I don't know. It's all speculation. It's all opinion. But my personal feeling is when you look at Oliver Cowdery, he was also involved in the Book of Abraham in 1835, 1836. So a lot of people don't realize that Oliver Cowdery wasn't just a scribe for the Book of Mormon. He was also a scribe for the Book of Abraham. And he was big on a philosophy of the future state. And he even put it in, can't remember if it was the Times and Season, but some Mormon newspaper that he was the editor. So he copied, he took extracts from the book and put it in the newspaper. So Oliver Cowdery thought it was important enough to share with his readers. So if it was important enough to share with his readers in the newspaper, why not share with Joseph Smith? And Joseph Smith had a copy of that book that he donated in 1843. So, you know what I mean? I think there's more to the story with the whole Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith working together. So.
And that could explain why Oliver Cowdery never denied the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, I mean,
if he was a co-author, then...
Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, why didn't he deny it? Well, reputation was everything back then. And, Oliver Cowdery still had fame. He was well known. A lot of people admired him as, well, a lot of people were like, wow, you're one of the witnesses, one of the Book of Mormon scribe, and you knew Joseph Smith. So, Oliver Cowdery, I mean, he couldn't be going out and saying, hey guys, this is all hoax. By the way, I was involved in it, because it would totally ruin his life. His credibility was everything because he was a lawyer. So if he would have come out and say, yeah, this is all fraud, and I played my part in it, and I swore, as a witness, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, this would have really ruined his credibility. So there's more to the story with the witnesses. All this, these claims, well, these witnesses never denied it. There's more to the story of why they didn't deny it. There's the culture, the reputations, you know what I mean?
And we'll talk about that in a sec. Just to close out the Book of Mormon, I don't know exactly what page it's on, but there's this summary that you make, which is that, oh, and by the way, the plates were actually never used in the translation. Like, we forget about that. Like, all the energy that would have gone into, like, killing Laban, bringing the brass plates, smelting metal pages, inscribing by hand, protecting them, passing down from generation to generation, sealing them up in a hole, having an angel deliver the plates, Joseph hiding the plates and protecting them. And then when it comes time...
4 years education with Moroni. He has to go every year before he gets the plates.
And then when it comes time to actually translate the Book of Mormon, what?
The Book of Mormon we have today, he didn't use the gold plates. He used a rock and a hat.
So they weren't even used?
They were used for the 116 pages with Martin Harris. But the
Allegedly.
But the Book of Mormon that we have today, the plates were not used.
It was a stone in the hat.
Yeah. The same stone in the hat that he and his family, used for their family treasure hunting family business.
Yeah.
But here's the important thing: a lot of the apologists, especially FAIR, what they try to do is they try to make the whole stone in the hat a little bit confusing. They keep throwing words like yom and thumim and the seer stone and try to make it sound supernatural. This rock was just the rock that Joseph found in his neighbor's property in 1822, a year before Moroni showed up in his bedroom. It's just a common rock that he found in William Chase's property. So there's nothing supernatural or special about it. It didn't come from ancient America. Moroni didn't put it in the hole in Hill Cumorah. It was just a rock that Joseph Smith found. But a lot of people get confused into thinking that it's special because they hear Urim and Thummim or Nephite interpreters, so forth.
Yeah. So let's talk briefly about the first vision and the witnesses, only because I think the way you weave those things together, these multiple timelines start to, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like, it's one thing to go, oh, the first vision, the story changes. And if I'm looking at that in isolation, then I'm like, oh, well, yeah, if I retell a story, each time I tell it, it's going to change a little bit.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll give them a pass on that. And then we have the first, the three witnesses, and we have the priesthood restoration and the dates, and then we have the evolving theology of, for example, God from Trinitarian. Talk about those things as they kind of weave together in a timeline.
Sure.
And as to how the aggregate of those stories on top of each other is a little bit more significant than in isolation.
Yeah. So the correlated version, as everybody knows, is that Joseph Smith had his first vision in 1820 as a result of the revival. Well, first of all, the historical records show that there was no revival in 1820. And second of all, Joseph Smith's family stated that they didn't join Presbyterianism until Alvin Smith died. And Alvin Smith died in 1823. And that matches up with that there was a revival in 1824. So the whole 1820 revival thing doesn't match with the historical record, because that's 3 years before Alvin Smith died, and 4 years after they joined the family joined, or Lucy Smith, and joined Presbyterianism. So and then there's the other one where Joseph Smith tried to join the Methodist Sunday school. He put his name down. After being told 8 years. This was 1828. So 8 years earlier, he supposedly saw God the Father and the Son, who told him that all the churches are an abomination. You know what I mean? But here he's trying to join the Methodist Sunday school or whatever it was 2 years before the church was restored or established on the earth, and 8 years after the first vision. Nobody, the members of a church never...
Also, the ages, depending on what account, his age changes.
Yeah, like 14 or 15. But there's only one account that has 15. And the apologists will say, it was the scribe put that in. And I discussed that in Debunking FAIR, my thoughts on that. But to me, it's not just who appears to Joseph Smith. It has all these, it has angels, like you mentioned, angels and just the Lord and two persons. It's not just that, but it has a contradiction. For example, in Joseph Smith's handwritten account, in the 1830 account, he states that he read the Bible and he came to the conclusion that the world was lost, like the true church of Jesus Christ, the New Testament church, was no longer on the earth. And then he went to the woods to pray for forgiveness of his sins. In the official...
That was the 1832 account, right?
Yeah, the first handwritten... This is Joseph Smith's own handwritten account. In the official version, it states that he didn't know which church to join. He was confused. He read James 1 verse 5, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And he went out to the woods for the purpose of asking which church that he should join. And then he later says, it never entered into my heart that they were all wrong. So you have this contradiction where he studies and he comes to his own conclusion that they're all wrong. Then he goes in the woods and asks for forgiveness of his sins. And then you have this other one where he has no idea. He thinks there might be a true church. So he goes into the woods to get the answer. And he's told that they're all an abomination. And then it never occurred to him that they were all wrong. So that's a major contradiction to me. It goes back to that modus operandi, his behavior of hiding things and not being things. Yeah.
And to me, it's super significant that in the 1832 version, when the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, God and Jesus are one. It's a Trinitarian view, just like everything else. 1832, he's still believing in that view. So when he tells the first vision story, it's the Lord who visits him in that account. by 1836, apparently he's changed and he's believing that God and Jesus are separate. Well, that not only manifests itself in the new version of the first vision, the 1836 version, having God introducing Jesus. Like, that's a major difference in the cast of characters in the vision.
Yeah, it was an 1838 account.
1838?
Yeah.
Sorry.
But the 1838 account didn't get printed and published until 1842, but it's the official version that we have.
Okay, thank you. But then they're changing the Book of Mormon, right?
Right.
In a subsequent edition, and those changes that we always sort of dismiss as insignificant, they're basically changing the text, and you show this in the letter,
Yeah.
from making it sound like God and Jesus are one. They're always trying to make it sound like God and Jesus are separate.
Yeah, and it's not just the Book of Mormon. Like, for example, the Lectures of Faith. There's a part that specifically talks about God is a spirit, and then it talks about tabernacle of flesh, like Jesus. Like, it really it separates the two. So it's really fascinating, the evolution of Joseph's theology and his perception of who God is, the Godhead or whatever. But when you step back and you say, well, wait a minute. I mean, this was happening in the 1830s, 12, 15, 22 years after the first vision in 1820, when he should have been, crystal clear that these are two separate beings, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. And then for me, the witnesses become really important because, what we think is that Joseph had the vision in 1820. He knows he's got to start a church. He's just patient, doesn't tell anybody, comes out with the Book of Mormon, and then starts the church. But then gets the priesthood, right? Before he actually releases the Book of Mormon, he receives the priesthood.
Yeah, but that, it wasn't like, hey guys, I got the priesthood. Like, that stuff didn't come until 1834.
And that's my point. When you read David Whitmer's letter that he writes after he's left the church, what does he say basically?
He said, never heard of it.
Never heard of what?
That the Aaronic priesthood, or John the Baptist coming to confer the priesthood to Joseph Smith and all the Cowdery.
So one of the founders of the church, one of the three witnesses, is saying this stuff about Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthood, we went 5 years and never talked about it.
Yeah, well, David Whitmer, I mean, he was one of the guys that was involved. And I mean, he was there during the Book of Mormon translation and when the church was restored. So it's not like he was just some guy that sat in the back pews. I mean, he was involved in the development of the church. And it's very telling that he's saying that I've never heard of any priesthood before 1834. And it matches to the record of, the Book of Commandments being changed. When the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, it's different than the 1833 Commandments, Book of Commandments. Like, there's backdating going on. You know what I mean? So, and Richard Bushman talks about it in Rough Stone Rolling. I mean, he admits that, that it appears that it's a fabrication based on, the later accounts. Talks about Mr. Lyman Wright, I think his name is. He conferred the Melchizedek priesthood to Joseph Smith in 1831. Like, it talks about that part in the Rough Stone Rolling. That's pretty mind-blowing as well. So,
yeah. And does the Book of Mormon have Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthood in it?
No.
Right. And doesn't Alma start baptizing without any sense of being ordained?
No.
So in 1830, they weren't believing that priesthood was necessary by the laying on of hands. So of course it wasn't in the Bible. And of course Joseph didn't talk about it. And of course David Whitmer says we never talked about it. But as Joseph's beliefs and doctrine change, then you start seeing the doctrine, the Book of Commandments amended to change with the new story, right?
Right.
And future revelations. But why doesn't the Book of Mormon just contain all this truth from the beginning?
Yeah.
Right?
Why doesn't it contain...
Why didn't the first vision stick, and why didn't the Book of Mormon contain all the truths from the beginning?
Yeah.
Versus having to change the Book of Mormon, change the first vision story, change the Book of Commandments to the Doctrine and Covenants. Everything's evolving with Joseph's beliefs, right?
Right.
And so those things in parallel to me means something more significant than when you study, he changed his story at the first vision. It's not that simple. It's how those stories lay on top of each other.
Yeah, and these are foundational stuff.
Yeah, right.
This is foundational stuff. This is not how the sacrament's being passed. You know what I mean? This is like
right.
Major,
which changes too, by the way. But okay, so yeah, that's really important. And not to mention, I've mentioned this in the podcast before. There's no temple marriage in the Book of Mormon. There's no endowment ceremony in the Book of Mormon. There's no celestial marriage in the Book of Mormon. Polygamy is forbidden in the Book of Mormon with the escape clause. But why aren't any of his Nauvoo theologies in the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a pretty clear picture of he's making it up as he goes along kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And then changing it as he goes, and then trying his best to cover it up by updating new versions that cover his tracks.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what comes out here.
Yeah, and it goes back to, Joseph Smith's modus operandi. How was he operating? And, when you look at the polygamy and the polyandry, how he hid it and denied it for 10 years, you look at the Book of Abraham, how he was grabbing stuff that was unrelated and to put in the missing parts of facsimile 2 and as you mentioned with the whole evolution of the first vision and the whole priesthood stuff, I mean, it just looks like it just looks like a clumsy hoax. I mean,
yeah, and again, if it were just the Book of Mormon, you'd be like, oh, it's not quite a translation, is it? But then you've got the Book of Abraham, and it's like, oh, well, that's not really a translation either. And then you've got the Kinderhook plates,
yeah,
which you talk about in here. Talk about that really briefly.
Well, I mean, just taking you to this graphic real quick. This graphic right here says Joseph Smith claimed to have translated 3 ancient records: the Book of Abraham, proven a fraud; the Kinderhook plates, found to be a hoax; the Book of Mormon, the only one of the 3 for which we do not have the original. I'm sure he was only wrong on 2 out of 3. After all, wouldn't you buy a 3rd car from a man who had already sold you two conkers?
Right.
So that kind of gives you why it's important.
Yeah. Talk briefly about what's most troubling to you about polygamy, or Joseph's practice of polygamy.
The polyandry and the marriage of the 14-year-old girls. One of the
it's only one, right?
No, 2.
Okay.
So one of them was Helen Mar Kimball, and the other one was I can't remember. I think her first name was Nancy.
And in the letter, you have a graph of all the wives.
Yeah. So one of the things that some people were offended by or objected to was my use of a term pedophilia. And they were like, well, Joseph Smith wasn't a pedophile just because he married 14-year-old girls. And I responded to that on my website. But basically, pedophilia is a sexual attraction of girls before puberty or during puberty. So in the 19th century, girls, they had their puberty around 14, 15 years old. So this was before or during puberty that Joseph Smith married these 14-year-old girls. And the only justification based on the polygamy rule book of 132, Doctrine and Covenants 132, is the only justification for polygamy is to multiply and replenish the earth, bear the seeds of bear the souls of men and raise seed. So the only justifiable reason for Joseph marrying 14-year-old girls was to basically have sexual relations with them. So to me, it's pedophilic because he was marrying these 14-year-old girls for the purpose of having sex and having children with them. But in the 19th century, they were either about to or were in the process of puberty. So that's why I use that term.
You mentioned being troubled by the coercion that was used. It really stuck out to me as I was preparing for this podcast. Not only did he tell the girls apparently that they might lose their souls if they said no.
Well, like Helen Mar Kimball, it was pressure that she had to marry Joseph because for her family's salvation and exaltation.
Right. So he's basically saying to the parents, "Let me have your daughter, and I promise you eternal life."
Yeah, and then they in turn are putting the pressure on this 14-year-old girl that this is a Mormon home and a Mormon family, and she feels obligated to follow this prophet, and her dad, who is and then there's a backstory with the dad. Heber C. Kimball. Joseph Smith tried to marry his wife. The apologists tried to portray this as, well, the Kimballs and Heber C. Kimball, he wanted to dynastically seal himself and his family to Joseph Smith. But when you read the account about how Joseph Smith asked Heber C. Kimball for his wife, he was so troubled by it that he didn't eat or sleep for 3 days. So that doesn't sound like somebody that wanted, like, this doesn't sound like an innocent sealing that had no effect. It sounded like he was wanted to marry his wife in a literal sense of a term.
Yeah. And of course he was denying it, lying about it, hiding it from Emma.
Yeah.
Like, all this stuff is problematic. He wasn't following the prescribed rules of D&C 132. It's very clear, the wife needs to approve and they need to be virgins, right? And he's not following any of the rules that are outlined in D&C 132. Not only that, and this is something your letter really brought to my attention, he's violating the 1835 version of the Doctrine and Covenants while he's already started practicing. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants is very specifically banning polygamy. It's saying, hey guys, we believe in monogamy. And this is scripture that's enforced the entire time all the way, I think, in 1875, somewhere around there, they changed it. But the whole Joseph Smith, his whole life, these scriptures were enforced, and here he was in the dark, marrying other men's wives and teenage girls, and while denying to Emma and the saints in the world. So to me, that's a big revealing thing about Joseph Smith's character, and again, I use that snapshot as a basis for when you go into the Book of Abraham and the Kinderhook plates and so forth.
Excellent. Any other aspects to the letter that you think we should bring out before we talk about sort of what's come about after publishing the letter? I mean, there's so much here. We could talk for days.
Yeah. I think we pretty much, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think the reason why the CES letter appeals to a lot of people is that it doesn't just hone in and focus on each specific issue. It also takes a step back. You take a step back and it ties it up from a big point of view. My letter is not meant to be a one-stop, all-comprehensive, you're done with your research type thing. My letter is meant to introduce you to the problems and issues, and then you go from there and you look at the sources and you confirm the sources for yourself, and you read the sources, different books and different, just do the research. It's basically kind of like a launching ground for people that are just getting exposed to these issues. So I just want to make that clear. It's not meant to, okay, once you read this, then you're an expert on all the problems of Mormonism.
Sure. So talk a bit about the positive response before we talk about FAIR.
How
many emails do you think you've received?
Thousands.
Thousands?
Yeah.
In a year?
Well, like ever since the CES letter got released in April 2013, I just get lots of emails, and it's really just being on the front line of real suffering, real confusion and heartache. A lot of people are like, I've had emails where a gentleman, for example, he emailed me. He said, when I first came out to my wife that I had doubts, it really devastated her, and she was just it was just traumatic. And for weeks, it was just really miserable. The word divorce was being thrown around, and I was just really worried about my marriage. And so, kind of as a last, push, I asked her to read the CES letter, and she agreed to read it. So after she read it and looked at the sources, read what FAIR has to say, and read my Debunking FAIR's debunking, she was done. So the word divorce was stopped being thrown around. They're recovering, moving on with their lives. So to me, that's that. When I look at divorce, I look at it through the eyes of the little boy a long time ago. I used to cry myself to sleep at night over my parents' divorce. I wondered, am I the cause of their divorce? Did they divorce because of me? Because of my hearing issue or whatever. So, to me, it's about saving families, about saving marriages. I get that sometimes divorce is necessary, but to me, there better be a damn good reason for getting divorced, because it's traumatic on kids, and I know that personally. So it's my passion. It's probably why I've put so much effort into Debunking FAIR's debunking, because if I can help just save one marriage or one family, to me it's worth it. And I just see these emails are kind of feedback. I'm seeing the effect that it has on people's lives, and it just, I have a passion for it. That's why in Debunking FAIR's debunking introduction, I talk about real lives, marriages, and families are on the line. These are real people that are suffering because of the church's dishonesty. Joseph Smith's rock and a hat thing is a fact. And when a husband goes to his wife and says, Joseph didn't use the gold plates, he used the rock and a hat, and the wife says, no, that's anti-Mormon. That's not true. He used gold plates. Well, what's the problem here? The problem is she didn't get the memo. The church didn't give her the memo. So you have this married couple that are clashing, and they both think they're right. You know what I mean? It's just dishonest. And so my goal is to just bring out the honesty. Let's make this honest, because we can't afford to be having all these marriages and families getting destroyed over Joseph Smith and Joseph Smith's religion. If you're going to get divorced over a good reason. Joseph Smith and Joseph Smith's religion is not a good reason to get divorced over. If one spouse believes Joseph Smith and the other one doesn't, work on it, figure things out. You know what I mean? Religion shouldn't be the reason for divorce. It should be, the spouse is totally unreasonable or abusive or whatever. So,
yeah. What's it like for you to feel in your heart like your motivation is to save marriages and lives even, and yet the way that some would characterize you or describe you, let's just say attention seeking or negative, or trying to tear down people's tender faith. So there's such a contrast between, have people said bad things about you?
Very, very few. I don't see a lot of them.
How about FAIR?
FAIR, yeah.
What'd they say? Like, what was their tactic? I read, so FAIR created a response to your CES letter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit familiar with, that class of people writing something personally and in response to your work. So I know what that feels like a bit. I've read a bit about their response to you. How did they start it, and what feeling did you get from how they were approaching it?
It just...
Start with personal. How did you feel they were trying to paint you?
Just this imbalanced ex-Mormon that's getting all his sources from anti-Mormon sources, who, like as you mentioned, is out to get attention. I'm not out to get attention. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not this, I'm not the greatest public speaker. You know what I mean? I'm just, like I said, when I wrote the letter, I didn't expect it to go anywhere. This thing landed into my lap. It just blew up. I would have never imagined that I would be talking to John DeLand 2 years after my faith crisis. You know what I mean? it just blows my mind. I'm just an ordinary guy, you know. So
how about that you're bitter and angry and negative?
I was pissed off in my faith crisis, and that's natural. That's part of the five stages of grief. I'm not angry anymore. I mean, I go on father-son campouts. I'm still on the elders quorum email list. If somebody needs help to move, I'll go move. You know what I mean? I'm past that. I've moved on. I'm not bitter or angry. I want, like, it goes back to saving marriages and families. These are real people, and I just think that the church needs to be honest. It just needs to. It can't be doing business as usual like it has the last 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, we're in a totally different world now. Something has to give, and honesty is the way.
Yeah. So what did you think about FAIR's response to you overall, the substance of it?
Well, I just want to put out that I appreciate that FAIR did the response, the analysis, because it gives my readers a balanced view of the issue. So they don't just have to read my letter and take my word for it. So, for example, the rock and the hat stuff, they can see FAIR's response that FAIR confirms that Joseph Smith really used the rock and the hat. So it adds that next level to the conversation. It adds that credibility. But on the other token, it was just responding to FAIR was actually more time-consuming and more difficult than it was writing the CES letter itself.
If you had to characterize their response overall, how would you characterize it?
Misleading.
Misleading. Why?
There's just so many straw men that they've used.
What do you mean by straw men?
Where they mischaracterize my argument. So I'll give you an example. You know, the Captain Kidd and you know, Comoros and Moroni. My argument is that Joseph Smith got those names from Captain Kidd's stories. Their argument is, well, Joseph Smith didn't have access to these maps. There was only so-and-so maps, and here's the library and all this stuff. No, that's not my argument. He didn't use maps. They were from the Joseph Smith stories.
The Captain Kidd stories?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's all kinds of different straw men that they use. And there's so much obfuscation where just they try to make the issue more confusing than it really is. And then there's their conclusion part was kind of ridiculous. They were basically, you know, attacking me on comments that I made on Reddit. Like these were comments that I made long after my faith crisis and transition. So I just didn't appreciate how they tried to, you know, character assassinate me that way.
How does it feel to know that when you post something on Facebook or Reddit, that there's apologists out there that are paying attention to it, copying it, pasting in some little file, and trying to figure out ways to use that against you later?
It's creepy. I mean, I already have the NSA after me. So now I have to worry about all these Mormon apologists.
Does it feel creepy?
Yeah, it feels creepy. It feels like, I don't know. I'm an open book. My life is an open book. My wife has passwords to everything. She wanted, I had nothing to hide. And in that sense, you know, even after knowing that FAIR was watching me, I still went on Reddit and put stuff down. So it's not like I'm unpredictable and making all these crazy comments and stuff. But at the same time, it's just just creepy and weird. You know what I mean? I just don't like it.
Have you ever feared for your safety?
No.
Not at all?
I mean, a lot of people have this perception that you know, they might think because I came out with this, I'm putting the church in an unfavorable light, that you know, I have a lot of enemies. Or I don't have any enemies that I know of. There's, I mean, most 98% of the emails I get are positive. I mean, the few that I get that are negative, they're interesting people. So I've had emails from like fundamentalists and polygamists and stuff. And then I had a few from really strong believers that, say I'm not giving, the nuance that it deserves. Or when I ask what they mean by that, they don't really give me examples. But overall, I don't fear for anything. I don't see any enemies. I just live life as usual. My life hasn't really changed other than, I'm more well known than I was 2 years ago.
Does this put stress on your personal life in any way?
Well, it does in the sense that it's emotional getting these emails. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to that, John. You get emails all the time, but just seeing these people, like what they're going through, and the struggle they're doing, and they're asking for advice, and your heart goes out to them. So it's emotionally draining in that sense. It's a little bit. It was stressful with FAIR, dealing with their, just dealing with them the last 6 months. I mean, almost every night until like 3 a.m, I was working on this. My weekends, goodbye, But it's calmed down a lot since then.
Why did you feel so necessary to do such an exhaustive response to FAIR? Like, I didn't even read, I may get in trouble for saying this, I didn't even read Gregory Smith's 100-page article about me. I didn't even read it. Like, not because I was scared, or I just didn't think it was worth the time.
Yeah. Well, my faith crisis in transition was prolonged because of FAIR. Because just going through all this stuff, and just to me it can be very confusing. There's so much research and all that. So to me, I saw this as an opportunity to provide that source for people to go to see, okay, FAIR says this. I say this. Here's the donut. Here's how much we.
Yeah, you've got these donut graphics in your response to FAIR, not only overall but also broken out by section, where you specify to what percent did they agree with you, to what percent did they just not respond, and then to what percent did they disagree with you. And it's overwhelmingly what?
A lot of it is overwhelmingly neutral. So that's a lot of people, when they see FAIR's answers or response, they think, well, they're on top of it, but they're not. Like, they're not responding to most of the issues, and the ones that they are, it's about half agree, disagree. Like the Book of Abraham was a very interesting thing. Like, it was almost like FAIR was defending Egyptology more than they were Joseph Smith. So to give you an example, the facsimile one with Abraham on the altar. So I in the original CES letter, I stated that there's a mummy on the altar, and based on the stuff that they found in Egypt. Well, it was really Osiris, because his leg was up, so he wasn't dead.
Okay.
So that was a mistake on my part. So FAIR was like, well, look, it's not a mummy, it's Osiris. What's wrong with you, Jimmy? And then I'm like, well, it doesn't matter because it's not Abraham. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just weird stuff like that.
Yeah. So, have they responded to your response?
No.
To their response?
They changed their answers. They removed some of the stuff that they had before.
So your debunking of their debunking caused them to
revise
retreat.
their website.
Yeah.
But that's fine. To me, I'm still going to leave my stuff on, and the answer they're giving, it speaks on its own. I just trust people that they can critical think and look at it themselves. So.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is that if a major technique of FAIR is to create complexity and confusion, so that people just go, oh, it's too confusing, I better just believe because they're smart people anyway.
Yeah, and that's...
You felt the need to then respond to that fear, uncertainty, and doubt by addressing it very meticulously so that you wouldn't let them get away with that tactic.
Yeah, I mean, really, has the gospel of Jesus Christ become so complicated that you have to read all these scholarly books, and just under the right condition, under the right apologist, or, you know what I mean? Like, to me, the gospel used to be the pure and simple. It was just pure and simple. Now it just seems to have changed into this weird, well, you got to read enough scholarly books to understand what really happened. And it begs the question of, what kind of mess is this really? Is this really God's plan? Is this really, God's church, to where it's so confusing and complex that we have to, figure out what happened in the 1830s and 1840s in order to get it?
Yeah.
The other thing is the appeal to authority fallacy, which is basically, well, there's smarter guys that have known these issues and they're still in. Well, I mean, there's Mormon intellectuals that are still, Muslim intellectuals that know the problems, and there's still Muslims. There's Catholic intellectuals that are still Catholics. It doesn't mean anything. Every religion has their intellectual. And the other key thing that a lot of true believing, or chapel Mormons, as I call them, don't realize is that these guys don't have the same testimony that the chapel Mormons do. You hear stuff like, I like Mormonism, I like what it does for my life, or Joseph Smith introduced the God, that really appeals to me. It's almost like a country club to these guys, you know what I mean? You don't hear stuff like...
You're referring to like Richard Bushman's testimony where he says, I'm Mormon because of the type of person it makes me.
Yeah, I like it's the way of life. I like, you know what I mean? You don't hear stuff like, I know with every fiber of my being that Joseph Smith saw God the Father in Jesus Christ, that the Book of Mormon is a literal history of the Americas, or, you know what I mean? You don't hear that kind of stuff. It's a different testimony. It's not the same.